When my sister Jessica pointed to the back corner of the restaurant and told me to sit there because the family table was for people who actually matter. I thought it was just another cruel joke. I had no idea that moment would be the beginning of her complete downfall. What I discovered about her in the following weeks would destroy not just her reputation, but everything she had stolen from our family. She thought she was untouchable, protected by decades of being the golden child. She was wrong. Before I tell you exactly how I brought down the sister who made my life hell, I want to know where you are watching from today. If this story hits close to home, please hit that like button and subscribe, because family drama like this deserves to be heard. Trust me, what happens next will shock you just as much as it shocked everyone at that restaurant. That humiliating dinner happened 3 months ago, but the story really begins 5 years earlier when our father passed away. Dad owned a successful construction company that he had built from nothing, and in his will he left everything to be split equally between Jessica, our brother Michael, and me. At least that is what we all believed. Jessica had always been the favorite. She was the eldest, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. When Dad got sick, she naturally stepped in to help manage his affairs. Mom was too heartbroken to deal with the business side of things, so Jessica took control of everything. She handled the funeral arrangements, the legal paperwork, and most importantly, the business transition. I was grieving and focused on supporting Mom through the worst time of her life. Michael was dealing with his own family crisis as his wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. We trusted Jessica completely. She was family after all, and family takes care of each other. Or so we thought. The first red flag came about 6 months after Dad's death when Jessica bought a brand new BMW. She claimed it was from her savings, but I remember thinking it seemed expensive for someone who worked as a middle school teacher. Then came the designer handbags, the luxury vacations, and eventually the down payment on a $500,000 house. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said she had made some smart investments with her inheritance money. But here is the thing that never sat right with me. I had not received a single penny of my inheritance yet. Every time I brought it up, Jessica would give me some excuse about probate delays or complicated tax issues. She always had an answer, and she always made me feel stupid for asking. Michael was dealing with mounting medical bills and desperately needed his portion, but Jessica kept telling us to be patient. 2 years passed, then 3. Jessica's lifestyle became increasingly lavish while Michael and I struggled financially. I was working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and Michael had to sell his house to pay for his wife's treatment. Meanwhile, Jessica was posting photos from her European vacation on social media. The breaking point came last Christmas at Mom's house. Jessica arrived wearing a coat that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. When I finally worked up the courage to ask directly about our inheritance, she rolled her eyes and said, "God, you are so obsessed with money. Maybe if you worked harder instead of constantly complaining, you would not need a handout." The way she said it with such casual cruelty made something click in my mind. This was not about delayed paperwork or complicated legal processes. Something was very wrong. That night, I decided to do some digging. I started with public records looking up the probate case for Dad's estate. What I found made my blood run cold. According to the official documents, the estate had been settled nearly 4 years ago. The construction company had been sold for almost $2 million, and the buyer was listed as JM Enterprises, LLC. A quick Google search revealed that JM Enterprises was registered to Jessica Marie Thompson, my sister's full name. She had not just been managing our father's business. She had been stealing it. I spent the next 2 weeks researching everything I could find. Bank records that I accessed through Mom's old financial power of attorney showed regular transfers from the construction company accounts to Jessica's personal accounts going back months before Dad even died. She had been siphoning money from the business while our father was on his deathbed. But the worst discovery came when I found a copy of Dad's original will in Mom's papers. The real will, not the one Jessica had shown us after the funeral. In the original document, Dad had left the house to Mom with specific instructions that it should eventually go to Michael and me. Jessica was supposed to receive only a small monetary gift and some personal items. The will Jessica had presented to us was a complete forgery. She had used her position as Dad's caretaker to manipulate him into signing fraudulent documents, or more likely, she had simply created fake papers and counted on our grief to prevent us from asking too many questions. I sat in my tiny apartment that night, staring at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, and I realized that my sister had stolen not just money, but years of our lives. Michael's wife had suffered through cancer treatments they could barely afford, while Jessica lived in luxury off money that should have paid for the best medical care. Mom continued living in the family house, unaware that it legally belonged to Jessica now, and could be taken away at any moment. The humiliation at the restaurant suddenly made perfect sense. Jessica did not see me as family anymore because she had convinced herself that she deserved everything Dad had worked for. In her mind, she was not stealing. She was taking what should have been hers all along. I knew I needed help, so I reached out to Michael first. When I showed him what I had discovered, he went completely silent for almost 10 minutes. Then he started crying. His wife Sarah had passed away just 2 months earlier, and he had been drowning in medical debt that could have been completely avoided if he had received his rightful inheritance. "She killed my wife," he whispered. "Not directly, but Jessica killed Sarah. We could have afforded the experimental treatment in Germany. We could have tried everything." That night, we called our cousin David, who worked as a paralegal in the city. David had always been close to our family, and he was the only person we trusted to give us legal advice without word getting back to Jessica. When we explained the situation, David's jaw dropped. "This is not just inheritance fraud," he said. "This is felony grand theft forgery, and probably elder abuse if she was manipulating your father when he was sick. We are talking about serious prison time." David agreed to help us build a case, but he warned us that confronting Jessica directly would be a mistake. "She has had 5 years to cover her tracks," he explained. "If you tip her off now, she might destroy evidence or try to flee. We need to be smart about this." But I was tired of being smart. I was tired of watching Jessica live in luxury while Michael suffered, and Mom remained oblivious to how badly she had been betrayed. Against David's advice, I decided to confront my sister directly. I waited until the following Saturday when I knew Jessica would be at her usual brunch spot with her friends. It was one of those trendy places downtown where everything costs $30 and they serve tiny portions on oversized plates. Very fitting for someone living a fake life on stolen money. I walked right up to her table where she was laughing with 3 other women I did not recognize. When she saw me, her face immediately shifted to that familiar expression of annoyance. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I told you I was busy today." "I know what you did, Jessica," I said loudly enough for her friends to hear. "I know about the forged will, the stolen money, and the fake business sale. I know everything." The color drained from her face, but only for a second. Then she laughed. That same cruel laugh she had perfected over the years. "You are insane," she said to her friends loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "My sister has always been jealous of my success. Now she is making up crazy stories because she cannot handle that I have done well for myself." Her friends nodded sympathetically, and I could see people at nearby tables starting to stare. Jessica stood up and moved closer to me, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. "Listen carefully," she said. "I do not know what kind of conspiracy theories you have been cooking up in that sad little apartment of yours, but if you ever embarrass me like this again, you will regret it. I have lawyers and I have money. You have nothing. Do not forget which one of us actually matters in this family." That was her biggest mistake. In her arrogance, Jessica had just threatened me in front of multiple witnesses. More importantly, she had revealed that she absolutely knew what I was talking about. An innocent person would have been confused by accusations of forged wills and stolen money. Jessica's immediate defensive response told me everything I needed to know. I pulled out my phone and started recording. So you are saying you did not forge Dad's will? You are saying you did not steal $2 million from his estate? You are saying you did not create a fake company to hide the theft? Jessica's eyes went wide when she saw the phone. She tried to grab it from my hands, but I stepped back. You are recording me without permission, she screamed. That is illegal. Actually, I said calmly, this is a public place and I have every right to record our conversation, especially when you are threatening me. The manager of the restaurant approached us at that point, clearly uncomfortable with the scene we were making. Jessica immediately put on her sweetest smile and explained that her mentally unstable sister was having an episode. She was so convincing that I almost doubted myself for a moment. But then I remembered Michael crying in my apartment, and I thought about Sarah dying without the treatment she needed. I thought about Mom living in a house that legally belonged to her thieving daughter, completely unaware that everything she believed about her late husband's wishes was a lie. Check the probate records for Robert Thompson, I told the manager and anyone else who was listening. Estate case number 4789B. See who really inherited what. I walked out of that restaurant knowing that I had just declared war on my sister. She had the money and the lawyers, but I had the truth. And as I was about to learn, sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. The confrontation at the restaurant was just the beginning. Within hours, Jessica had called Mom and fed her some story about me having a mental breakdown and making wild accusations. By the time I got home, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail from Mom begging me to get help for my delusions. Jessica was smart. I had to give her that. She knew that controlling the narrative was crucial, and she had spent 5 years positioning herself as the responsible, successful daughter while painting me as the struggling, bitter sister who could not get her life together. Who would Mom believe? The daughter who had taken care of everything after Dad's death? Or the daughter who worked at a coffee shop and lived paycheck to paycheck? But Jessica had underestimated how much evidence I had already gathered, and she definitely underestimated my determination to expose her. If she wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to get in the mud. David had been right about one thing. I needed help. Taking down someone with Jessica's resources and connections would require more than just public records and righteous anger. I needed allies who understood the system and could help me navigate the legal maze ahead. My first call was to Martha Rodriguez, an investigative journalist who had written several articles about estate fraud for the local newspaper. I had found her contact information while researching similar cases, and her work showed that she was passionate about exposing financial crimes that targeted grieving families. When I explained the situation to Martha over coffee, her eyes lit up with professional interest. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told," she said. Elder abuse and inheritance theft are massive problems, but most victims never speak up because they are embarrassed or they do not know their rights. Martha introduced me to Frank Williams, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who now worked as a private consultant. Frank had seen cases like this before, and he warned me that Jessica would likely escalate her efforts to discredit me. People who commit these kinds of crimes are often very good at manipulation, Frank explained. She has probably been planning for the possibility of exposure for years. Expect her to get aggressive. He was right. 2 days after our restaurant confrontation, I received a certified letter from Jessica's attorney threatening me with a defamation lawsuit if I continued to spread false and malicious rumors. The letter detailed how my harassment was affecting Jessica's reputation and mental health, and it demanded that I cease all contact with her and retract my accusations publicly. The legal letter was intimidating, but David assured me that it was mostly bluster. Defamation requires proving that your statements are false, he explained. Since everything you are saying is true and you have evidence to back it up, she would never actually file this lawsuit. She is trying to scare you into backing down. Meanwhile, Michael was dealing with his own pressure campaign. Jessica had convinced Mom that Michael was encouraging my delusions, and now Mom was threatening to cut off contact with both of us if we did not stop attacking Jessica. It was painful to watch my family fall apart, but I reminded myself that Jessica was the one who had started this destruction 5 years ago. The breakthrough came when Martha's research uncovered something I had missed. While digging through property records, she discovered that Jessica had not just stolen from our father's estate. She had been running a similar scam on at least 2 other elderly clients through her position at the school district. Jessica had been volunteering with a program that helped seniors with financial planning and estate preparation. Through this program, she had gained access to the personal information of several vulnerable elderly people, and Martha found evidence that at least 3 of them had made suspicious changes to their wills shortly before their deaths, with Jessica listed as a beneficiary. "This is not about your family anymore," Martha told me. "This is about a serial predator who has been targeting elderly victims for years. Your father was not her first victim, and he would not have been her last." Frank ran background checks on the other victims and discovered a pattern. All of them had been isolated elderly people with substantial assets and limited family oversight. Jessica had been systematically identifying vulnerable targets and manipulating them into changing their estate plans in her favor. One of the victims was an 84-year-old woman named Eleanor Murphy, who had died 2 years earlier. According to the records, Eleanor had changed her will 6 months before her death to leave her house to Jessica, supposedly in gratitude for Jessica's help with her finances. Eleanor's nephew, Patrick Murphy, had been suspicious at the time, but had not pursued the matter because he assumed his aunt had the right to leave her property to whomever she chose. When Martha contacted Patrick and explained what we had discovered about Jessica, he immediately agreed to join our investigation. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "My aunt barely knew Jessica, but suddenly she was calling her like a daughter and talking about how grateful she was for Jessica's help. It never made sense." With Patrick's help, we gained access to Eleanor's financial records and discovered the same pattern of suspicious transfers and forged documents that we had found in our father's case. Jessica had stolen nearly $400,000 from Eleanor's estate. Our team was growing stronger, but Jessica was not sitting idle. She had hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, and soon I was getting calls from people in my past asking strange questions about my finances, my mental health history, and my relationship with my family. The pressure campaign intensified when Jessica convinced Mom to stage what amounted to an intervention. Michael and I were invited to family dinner at Mom's house, only to find Jessica there with a grief counselor who specialized in helping families deal with delusional behavior following traumatic loss. The counselor, Dr. Patricia Morgan, clearly had been briefed by Jessica beforehand. She spoke to me like I was a child having a tantrum, explaining how grief could cause people to create elaborate conspiracy theories as a way of avoiding the reality of their loss. "Sometimes when we feel powerless, we create stories that make us feel like we have some control," Dr. Morgan said gently. "It is very common for people to blame family members for their financial struggles, rather than accepting responsibility for their own situation." I sat there listening to this woman psychoanalyze me based on Jessica's lies, and I realized that my sister was even more dangerous than I had thought. She was not just a thief. She was a master manipulator who could convince trained professionals that her victims were the real problem. But Dr. Morgan made a crucial mistake. As she continued to lecture me about the dangers of false accusations, I pulled out my phone and showed her the probate records, the bank transfers, and the forged will documents. "Can grief cause someone to forge legal documents?" I asked. "Can trauma make someone create fake business entities and transfer stolen money?" Dr. Morgan's expression changed as she reviewed the evidence. This was not the delusional ranting that Jessica had described. These were specific, verifiable facts backed up by official documentation. Mom finally looked at the papers too, and I watched her face crumble as the truth began to sink in. For 5 years, she had been praising Jessica for taking such good care of the family, never knowing that her eldest daughter had been systematically looting her late husband's legacy. "This cannot be real," Mom whispered. "Jessica would never. She loved your father so much." But even as Mom struggled to accept the truth, I could see Jessica calculating her next move. She was not going to go down without a fight, and I had the feeling that her most dangerous tricks were still to come. Just when I thought we had built an unshakable case against Jessica, everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. The betrayal came from the person I trusted most, David, our cousin, who had been helping us navigate the legal system from the beginning. It started with small things that I should have noticed earlier. David began asking increasingly detailed questions about our evidence, claiming he needed to understand every aspect of the case to build the strongest possible legal strategy. He wanted copies of all our documents, access to our research files, and detailed information about everyone we had contacted during our investigation. I was so focused on taking down Jessica that I did not question why David suddenly seemed so interested in the financial specifics of our case. When he asked for bank account numbers and social security information to verify the fraud claims, I handed everything over without hesitation. He was family after all, and he was supposed to be on our side. The first sign that something was wrong came when Martha called me in a panic. "Someone leaked our investigation to Jessica's legal team," she said. "They filed a motion to block my article, and they have detailed information about every source we contacted. They know things that only our inner circle should know." My stomach dropped as the implications hit me. Jessica's lawyers had not just learned about our investigation. They had intimate knowledge of our strategy, our evidence, and our witnesses. Someone had been feeding information directly to the enemy. The betrayal became clear when Patrick Murphy called to tell me that he was withdrawing from our case. "I received a visit from some very expensive lawyers today," he said quietly. "They showed me documents that prove my aunt's will was legitimate. They also had detailed information about my personal finances and some mistakes I made on my taxes a few years ago. They suggested it would be better for everyone if I stopped making false accusations about Jessica." Frank Williams delivered the final blow when he told me that our entire investigation had been compromised. "Someone has been systematically undermining our case for weeks," he explained. "Witnesses have been intimidated, evidence has been questioned, and counter-narratives have been planted that make Jessica look like the victim of a vindictive family conspiracy." I knew there was only one person who could have orchestrated this level of sabotage. When I confronted David directly, he did not even try to deny it. "Jessica offered me $50,000 to keep her informed about your investigation," he said with a shrug. "I have student loans and a mortgage, and frankly, I think you are fighting a losing battle anyway. Jessica has resources and connections that you cannot compete with." The betrayal hurt more than anything Jessica had done to me. David was supposed to be family. I had trusted him with everything, and he had sold me out for money just like Jessica had sold out our father's memory. But David's treachery went deeper than I initially realized. He had not just been passing information to Jessica, he had been actively sabotaging our case from the inside. The legal letter threatening me with defamation had been written based on David's inside knowledge of our evidence. The private investigator digging into my background had been hired using intelligence that David provided. Even the intervention with Dr. Morgan had been planned using David's detailed reports about my emotional state and mental health. Jessica had played a masterful game using my trust and family loyalty against me while simultaneously destroying the case I thought I was building. Worse yet, David's betrayal had legal implications that I had not considered. As a paralegal, he had access to privileged information about our case strategy, and his breach of that trust could potentially invalidate some of our evidence. The lowest point came when Michael called to tell me that he was backing out of the fight entirely. "I cannot afford to lose any more," he said, his voice broken. "Jessica's lawyers contacted my employer and suggested that my involvement in this family dispute might affect my security clearance at work. I cannot lose my job too. It is all I have left after Sarah died." In the span of 1 week, I went from having a strong team of allies to being completely alone. Jessica had systematically dismantled everything we had built using her resources and David's inside information to intimidate witnesses, discredit evidence, and isolate me from anyone who might help. The psychological warfare escalated when Jessica began a campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent. Using David's detailed reports about my emotional state, she petitioned the court to have me evaluated for psychiatric commitment, claiming that my obsession with false accusations posed a danger to myself and others. Dr. Morgan, the grief counselor who had been brought in for the family intervention, filed a report supporting Jessica's petition. The report described me as someone suffering from delusional disorder with paranoid features, brought on by unresolved grief and financial stress. According to the evaluation, my accusations against Jessica were a manifestation of my inability to accept responsibility for my own life circumstances. I found myself in the terrifying position of having to prove my sanity to a court system that had already been influenced by Jessica's narrative. The preliminary hearing was a nightmare, where I was treated like a mental patient rather than a crime victim. Jessica's lawyers presented a compelling case that I was suffering from a psychological break that made me dangerous to my family. The judge ordered a full psychiatric evaluation and temporary restrictions on my contact with family members. I was prohibited from approaching Jessica's mom or any of their properties. Violating these restrictions would result in immediate imprisonment and forced commitment to a psychiatric facility. Sitting in my apartment that night, legally barred from contacting my own mother, and facing the possibility of being locked away in a mental institution, I realized that Jessica had won. She had not just stolen our inheritance. She had destroyed my reputation, my family relationships, and nearly my freedom itself. But sometimes when you lose everything, you discover what you are really made of. And I was not ready to give up yet. My salvation came from the most unexpected source, Eleanor Murphy's church. While I was fighting Jessica's legal attacks and dealing with the psychiatric evaluation, Pastor James Richardson from St. Catherine's Episcopal Church had been conducting his own investigation into Eleanor's suspicious death. Pastor Richardson had known Eleanor for over 20 years, and her sudden decision to change her will had never made sense to him. Eleanor had been a devout woman who regularly spoke about her plans to leave her estate to the church and her nephew Patrick. When she died and left everything to Jessica Thompson, a virtual stranger, Pastor Richardson had suspected something was wrong. Unlike Patrick, who had been intimidated into silence by Jessica's lawyers, Pastor Richardson had connections to the religious community that extended far beyond our local area. He had reached out to other churches and discovered a disturbing pattern of elderly parishioners making sudden will changes in favor of people who had approached them through charitable organizations. Pastor Richardson's investigation had uncovered 2 additional victims of Jessica's scheme. Robert Torres, an 80-year-old widower who had left his retirement savings to Jessica 6 months before his death, and Margaret Walsh, a 78-year-old woman who had signed over her house to Jessica after meeting her through a senior center volunteer program. But Pastor Richardson had something that our previous investigation had lacked: credibility with law enforcement and the legal system. As a respected community leader with 40 years of experience dealing with elder abuse cases, his concerns carried weight that my accusations had not. When Pastor Richardson contacted Detective Linda Mason at the Elder Abuse Division of the District Attorney's Office, she immediately opened a formal investigation. Detective Mason had been tracking suspicious patterns in estate fraud cases for years, and Jessica's name had appeared in her files multiple times as a beneficiary of elderly victims. The breakthrough came when Detective Mason obtained search warrants for Jessica's financial records based on Pastor Richardson's evidence. What they discovered was far worse than even I had imagined. Jessica had been running this scam for almost 8 years, targeting vulnerable elderly people across 3 different counties. The financial records revealed a sophisticated operation. Jessica had created multiple fake charitable organizations and volunteer programs that gave her access to elderly victims. She would spend months building relationships with these people, gaining their trust, and learning about their financial situations. Once she had identified profitable targets, she would manipulate them into changing their wills or signing over assets. Detective Mason's investigation uncovered evidence of at least 12 different victims with total theft amounts exceeding $4 million. Jessica had been using the stolen money to fund her lavish lifestyle, while reinvesting portions of it to expand her criminal operation. But the most damning evidence came from Jessica's own digital records. In her hubris, she had kept detailed files on all her victims, including psychological profiles, financial assessments, and step-by-step plans for manipulating each target. She had even recorded some of her conversations with elderly victims, apparently as insurance in case they tried to change their minds about their generous gifts. One recording was particularly devastating. It featured Jessica coaching our father through signing a new will while he was heavily medicated for pain management. On the recording, Dad sounded confused and disoriented, repeatedly asking Jessica to explain what he was signing. Jessica's responses were patient but manipulative, assuring him that these were just routine updates that would make things easier for the family. When Detective Mason played that recording for me, I broke down completely. Hearing my father's voice, weak and confused, being manipulated by his own daughter in his final days was more painful than all of Jessica's other betrayals combined. The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement became involved. Detective Mason had resources and authority that our civilian investigation had lacked. She could obtain financial records, interview witnesses under oath, and most importantly, she could protect people from Jessica's intimidation tactics. Patrick Murphy found his courage again when Detective Mason assured him that he would have police protection from Jessica's legal threats. "I knew my aunt would never have left everything to a stranger," he said when he agreed to testify. "But I was too afraid to fight someone with that much money and power." One by one, the other victims' families came forward. Robert Torres's son drove down from Oregon to provide evidence about his father's suspicious will change. Margaret Walsh's sister delivered documents that proved Margaret had been manipulated while suffering from early-stage dementia. The strongest ally turned out to be someone I had never met: Jessica's former colleague at the school district, Sandra Bell. Sandra had been reporting her suspicions about Jessica's volunteer work with seniors for over 2 years. But her complaints had been ignored by administrators who saw Jessica as a dedicated teacher doing charitable work. Sandra had kept detailed records of her concerns, including dates when Jessica had requested access to student family information that had no educational purpose. She had also documented instances where Jessica had used school resources to contact families of elderly grandparents, always claiming it was for community outreach programs. "I knew she was up to something," Sandra told Detective Mason. "But she was so good at making herself look like the perfect teacher and community volunteer. No one wanted to believe that someone who worked with children could be targeting elderly people." Sandra's evidence provided the final piece of the puzzle. She had recordings of staff meetings where Jessica had specifically requested to coordinate programs that would give her access to families with elderly members. She had copies of emails where Jessica had asked for personal information about students' grandparents, claiming she wanted to invite them to school events. The case against Jessica was now solid enough that Detective Mason felt confident moving forward with formal charges. But she warned me that Jessica would likely fight back harder than ever once she realized that law enforcement was involved. "People like your sister do not go quietly," Detective Mason explained. "She has spent years building this criminal enterprise, and she will do whatever it takes to protect it. Expect her to get desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." Detective Mason was right to be concerned. Within hours of the search warrant being executed on Jessica's house, my apartment was broken into and ransacked. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Jessica wanted me to know that she could reach me whenever she wanted. But this time I was not alone and afraid. I had law enforcement protection, credible allies, and most importantly, I had evidence that could not be discredited or explained away. Jessica had made the mistake of leaving a paper trail, and that trail was about to lead her straight to prison. The final confrontation happened not in a courtroom, but in the parking lot of Mom's house on a cold Tuesday morning in March. I had gone to check on Mom after not hearing from her for several days, and I found Jessica there loading boxes into her BMW. When she saw me, Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. This was not the controlled, manipulative woman who had been running psychological warfare campaigns for months. This was someone who knew her world was about to collapse and was making desperate moves to save herself. "You destroyed everything," she screamed at me across the parking lot. "I worked so hard to build a life, and you ruined it all because you are jealous and pathetic." I could see Mom watching from the kitchen window, and I realized that Jessica was stealing from her too. The boxes she was loading contained family photos, Dad's personal belongings, and what looked like important documents from Mom's house. "What are you taking from Mom's house?" I asked, pulling out my phone to record the conversation. Jessica's response was pure rage. "I am taking what belongs to me. This house belongs to me. Those photos belong to me, and everything in there belongs to me because I am the one who took care of this family when nobody else would." That statement would later be used as evidence in court because it was a clear admission that Jessica believed she owned property that legally belonged to Mom. But in the moment, I was just heartbroken to see how completely my sister had lost touch with reality. The police arrived within minutes. I had called them as soon as I saw Jessica loading boxes. Detective Mason had put a flag on Mom's address after discovering that the family house was also part of Jessica's fraudulent estate planning. When officers approached Jessica, she tried to claim that she was just helping Mom clean out storage items, but the boxes clearly contained valuable family heirlooms and legal documents. Inside the house, we found Mom tied to a chair in the basement. Jessica had not physically hurt her, but she had essentially held her prisoner while she ransacked the house for anything valuable. Mom was dehydrated and scared, but she was alive and relatively unharmed. She said the police were coming to arrest me for helping with the will fraud. Mom explained through tears. She said the only way to protect me was to get rid of any evidence that I knew what was happening. I was so confused and scared that I let her tie me up while she searched the house. That was the moment I realized how far Jessica's manipulation had extended. Even at the very end, she had convinced our mother that she was the victim, and Jessica was trying to protect her. The psychological damage Jessica had inflicted on our family was going to take years to heal. The trial lasted 3 months and attracted significant media attention thanks to Martha's reporting. Jessica's case became a cautionary tale about elder abuse and the vulnerability of grieving families to financial predators. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Financial records, forged documents, recorded conversations, and testimony from multiple victims and their families. Jessica's defense strategy was exactly what Detective Mason had predicted. She claimed that she was the victim of a family conspiracy led by me, motivated by jealousy and financial desperation. Her lawyers painted me as a bitter, unsuccessful sister who had manipulated grieving family members into making false accusations against the successful sibling. But the evidence spoke for itself. The jury heard recordings of Jessica manipulating elderly victims, saw documentation of forged wills, and reviewed financial records that traced millions of stolen dollars through various accounts and shell companies. Jessica's own words, captured in her detailed victim files, proved beyond doubt that this had been a deliberate and sophisticated criminal operation. The turning point in the trial came when Pastor Richardson testified about Eleanor Murphy's case. His dignity and credibility as a witness completely undermined Jessica's narrative about vindictive family members making false accusations. When a respected community leader with no personal stake in the outcome testified that Jessica had defrauded his parishioner, the jury finally understood the true scope of her crimes. Jessica was convicted on 14 counts of elder abuse, 12 counts of grand theft, 8 counts of fraud, and 6 counts of forgery. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 7 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution of over $4 million to her victims and their families. But the legal victory was only part of the justice that was served. Jessica's conviction made headlines across the region, and her story became a warning about the signs of elder abuse that families should watch for. The volunteer programs she had used to access victims were completely restructured with new oversight and background check requirements. David, our cousin who had betrayed us for money, was also charged with conspiracy and ethics violations related to his breach of legal privilege. He lost his paralegal license and received 2 years probation plus community service. More importantly, his betrayal was exposed publicly, and he became a cautionary tale in his own right about the consequences of choosing money over family loyalty. The money recovery process took almost a year, but eventually Michael and I received the inheritance that was rightfully ours from the beginning. Michael used his portion to establish a scholarship fund in Sarah's memory for cancer research. I used mine to start a nonprofit organization that helps families recognize and report elder abuse. Mom has struggled the most with the aftermath of Jessica's betrayal. Learning that her eldest daughter had manipulated and stolen from her dying husband was devastating, but she has been working with a therapist who specializes in helping families heal from financial abuse. Slowly, she is rebuilding her sense of trust and learning to forgive herself for not seeing the signs earlier. The most surprising outcome has been the family that Michael and I have built with the people who helped us through this ordeal. Pastor Richardson has become like a grandfather to both of us. Detective Mason and her team have remained friends who check on us regularly. Martha continues to report on elder abuse cases and often consults with us on how families can protect themselves. We have created what people call a chosen family, a group of people who support each other not because of blood relationships, but because of shared values and genuine care. It turns out that losing Jessica was not really a loss at all. It was the removal of a toxic presence that had been poisoning our family relationships for years. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized that the moment Jessica told me to sit in the corner because I did not matter was actually a gift. It was the moment I finally saw her true character clearly, without the filter of family loyalty and childhood conditioning that had kept me blind to her cruelty for so long. Jessica thought she was untouchable because she had money and connections and the ability to manipulate people. But she forgot that the truth has its own power, and eventually that power becomes stronger than any amount of stolen wealth or legal maneuvering. Today, I want to ask you something that connects to this whole journey. Have you ever had a family member betray your trust in a way that completely changed how you see them? How did you find the strength to fight back when everyone around you was telling you to let it go? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help me understand that we are not alone in these struggles. If this story of family karma and justice served hit you the same way it hit me when I was living through it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to family bullies and finding your chosen family. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the truth always wins in the end, even when it takes longer than we want. Thank you for listening to my story, and for understanding that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we trusted the most. I hope you learned what I learned, that real family is not about blood relations. It is about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart and help you rebuild something better than what you lost.